Thank you all so much for joining Jesuit Media Lab this evening. We are truly thrilled to have you. So just kicking us off with a little introduction of Kelly. Kelly Latimore is one of the most celebrated artists of contemporary religious icons who prayerfully creates art depicting God in plain sight. His modern take on the centuries-old practice of iconography fuses biblical imagery and modern cultural resets, substituting well-known biblical figures for those who represent the marginalized and oppressed. And we are truly delighted to have him with us this evening. I want to give everyone a brief layout of our hour together. We'll start with an interview portion and then move into viewing and discussing some of Kelly's work, and we'll conclude with a time for questions. So we can go ahead and get started. Tonight, we're going to discuss how art works in conversation with justice in our world. Kelly, your work is such a powerful example of this dialogue between art and justice, as so many of your icons portray holy figures as the marginalized experiencing the hardships of injustice. My first question is, when you first began creating icons, was justice a focus of your art, or was there a specific moment or experience that made social justice so central to your artwork?
Yes, and I can answer that. First off, I just want to say I apologize to everyone if I'm sounding a little muffled. I'm getting over a cold. Luckily, I'm in the up end of it. So I apologize for that. But more directly, thank you so much for Jesuit Media Lab for having me tonight, and thank you for everyone joining us across everywhere. Um, but more specifically to the question, I just brief context. I'm a PK. I'm a pastor's kid. I grew up in Midwest. I've always been making art. I mean, it really started as like drawing all over the bulletins as a kid as my dad was preaching and just like covering them. Just to later, making art, throughout my life. And I went to school for religion and art in college, but um, really pretty much something that changed my life and I think this is going to be a continuing theme is relationships. And it was specifically leaving school and college and academia and something I was never a very good student, to be honest, but um, I ended up leaving and moving Illinois, moving to Ohio and joining a community called the Common Friars. And we lived our life based on prayer, daily prayer, and rule of life. But specifically, the main mission of this place, which was called the Good Earth Farm in Athens, Ohio, was a food pantry farm. And this is the context that I started painting icons was um, this really we were growing food, but we were also wanting to do that um, not just in isolation as people, but like joining people in that work. And we had volunteers. We also had unhoused people from local shelters that would come and they would be like weeding a bed of carrots and like hearing their stories and it was a really profound time for me. I think I grew up with a spirituality and evangelicalism that was really based on transcendence, like almost like Jesus and I versus the world, which can be like a really damaging, honestly, way to view the world. Um, and really, this kind of it was a years long transition, but being on this farm and growing food and weeding carrots across from strangers and hearing their stories and milking a cow every morning at 6 a.m., 6 p.m., and all these things. It showed me that the ways that we use things is of the utmost spiritual significance, and that my spirituality stopped being about transcendence, more about communion, engagement, embodiment, and that the ways, that we are with one another is important. So it's in that context that um where it wasn't like it wasn't like growing for people, it was like being with and that like Emmanuel side of things that I think of social justice that and being with people that I started iconography. So in that context, as we were farmers trying to enter into right relationship with the earth, and as we're growing food for the food insecure, my one of my best friends, Paul, who's part of the community, used to say, how do we be people in Jesus's words, like who consider the lilies of the field, and And so that became the focus of my first icon. And if for those who've seen it, it's a good first try. It's not great. I've always been painting, I've always been doing landscapes and portraits, but it was the first icon I did. And if you see it, it's kind of one of my Franciscan brother friends likes to say that he's seen it, it's like Jesus almost surprised that the lilies are in his hands. It's called Christ Consider Lilies. So it's a good first try. But what's more important though about this and for our conversation tonight is that it was in the context of community. It was a part of our common experience. And was so kind of a community. They embraced image, even though it wasn't a great icon, it was a good first try. They embraced it. They put it on the prayer wall in our little chapel space, and it really showed me how art can really, specifically though in the context of community, can really be a placeholder for our thought and our prayer, but most importantly, our action. And they embraced it because it was a part of our common experience. And so, having that kind of relationship with people, but in that creating, entering into iconography through that. Um, and it was through, I should have said, Father Tom, who was a priest in our community, who was the one who had said, "Have you ever tried icons?" And I hadn't, and he was the one who suggested it. So, and that was why I started it. But that it was through the context of community that I even started doing this work. So,
That's fascinating. Thank you so
yeah,
much for sharing, Kelly. I love that your friend said that Jesus looked surprised by the lilies. That's such an incredible like first take on it.
right.
And I feel like that surprise kind of weaves through your artwork because something that I've always loved about it is how it subverts expectations. Like you portray this traditional icon of the Madonna and Child, and then you place them in the rubble of deconstruction or behind the bars of a detention center. And I think that, like you were saying, that's something that does that. It's almost that surprise that can push people to action, that can go, wait, I need to reconsider this or look at this another way. What inspired these ideas of portraying the injustice in our present world with holy figures at the center? How did you kind of come to that decision as a part of your creative process?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the main in entering into the work of iconography, I mean, just a quick, I mean, icons are really, they're called in the Orthodox tradition, window to God or a window to a saint or Christ, and a window to heaven in this sense. But um, with icons, I think I was really trying to enter into the rich tradition of iconography and the metaphors and the symbols and all these things, but then also connecting to so many artists throughout time who have really just they were trying to in a sense like bring the stories from the scriptures and of the saints into the present in a way where they could be made new. And it's not something that I'm doing. I mean, artists have been doing this throughout time. I mean, you've got like Peter Bugle, the elder, who has this. If you've seen this, it's called the Census of Bethlehem. It's like this piece where it's just like this whole scene of like people like doing their daily work, and it's like a huge piece, and the Holy Family is like on their donkey in like this little section. It's like stuff's going on while the Holy Family is like they're also important, but like this kind of like artists have been doing this thing for a long time. Like, how do we pay attention? And I think for me, it's I look towards I've done a lot of thinking about like the personhood of Saint Francis has always been a huge and specifically the story of Saint Francis meeting the leper on the road, and he has this moment. It's a huge conversion moment for him, where he was disgusted by the leper, but Saint Francis all of a sudden has this moment where he takes deep love and pity and sees Christ in the leper. But more to that point, though, that Saint Francis has this conversion of sight, and I think that's a huge moment for him, but also that phrase conversion of sight is something that I thought about a lot. And I think taking the metaphors and the symbols of traditional iconography with the halos and all those, and then bringing that into the present in a way of things that we know now. I think it's an attempt of me trying to have my own conversion of sight, of seeing the sacredness of all people, of people who are on the margins, the immigrant, the refugee, the unhoused, you know, those in the LGBTQAI community, all these people who have been pushed to the side, that Christ says he is to be found in least of these and those who suffer. So he is present within them. And so that's really been the focus of my work now, and the work that I collaborate with my partner Evie for the last, 5, 6 years now is really focusing on the least of these. And so, Christ is that, like piece like the Sacred Familia that we did, which I painted in 2016, was a direct response to all this rhetoric that was going on that, vilifying immigrants in our country and migrants and Evie and I had talked about like, well, what's an image that we could create that really is going to respond to some of this terrible rhetoric that's going on? Like, and we just thought, well, the Holy Family were in their own sense and fleeing Herod, they were refugees. They were fleeing and trying to escape their child being killed. Like they're refugees. Like it's the same thing. And that so many families are experiencing the same thing today that the Holy Family was 2,000 years ago. So we created this piece. And so it's really been really trying to again take these kind of things from iconography and traditional art forms, but carrying them forward and using these kind of modern things that people connect to and know in our time in a way where they're made new and potentially we can continually have a conversion of sight. And when we do that in the context of community, I think it can really transform us in the way that we look at our everyday neighborhoods. Like if you're looking for Christ in your time, go walk around your neighborhoods and you'll probably find them, you know.
I love that. And that's so fitting. It feels very Ignatian as well, and that there's God in all things, there's God in all
Yeah.
people. And I think that your artwork really brings that to light. Especially I loved your phrase, the sacredness of all people. Um, I think that when you were talking about paying attention and how important it is to pay attention, that's so clear in your work. And as a fellow creator and as those who are watching the news and things like this, I think a big question I had for you is how do you engage with the injustice? How do you pay attention to the injustice of the world while retaining a heart that's tender enough to create such powerful images? Do you have any advice for that, or how what does your artistic process look like with it?
Yeah, I think um it's a really hard time. It really is. I mean, it's very hard. Um and I mean the writer George Saunders said something the other day I was reading and I thought it was apt. I mean, and especially like for people that making art, whether it's poetry, music, writing, visual art, what have you, I just feel like we're at a time, especially under this administration and the things that are going on in our country, it's you can feel like you're like painting the baseboards of your house and then the roof collapses in and like what do you do? And but I think for me I'm always holding out hope that people can open themselves up to new images of God. And that's the thing. I think um the thing with icons is, I said they could be, and this is the work that I've been doing, there can be a window to God or a window to a saint into these things. But they can also be iconoclastic, which means breaking images, in the sense that there's something about the image of God that will always be resisted. This could sound provocative, but there's something about the image of God that can always be resisted. And there's also something about the God that will always be rejected or crucified because we continue to crucify each other. we continue to fail to see the sacredness or the holiness within the image of God within each other. And I think for me, it's my hope that I'm holding out hope that through some of these images and through the work and through the relationships of all of these people who are standing up for the most vulnerable among them, their neighbors, for migrants and refugees in America, but also across the world, that um, and highlighting through a halo or through some of these images the inherent that we're all icons of God. We all have the image of God within us. And I think for me as an artist, it's my hope that through some of these images that I've created myself and all through commissions and collaborations that people can potentially open themselves up to the images of God they might not have seen before. And I think that's um, in an age where in my time as in evangelical youth, I think we think that the only way that we're going to know the truth is to be confronted by it. But that's not necessarily the way. It's um, we don't always have to be a solution to something, but how do we also be a sign to a different way? And I think as the artist, like I've never been a very good person in terms of trying to describe the art, and this is a moment where I'm doing that here with all of you all. But I am trying to communicate something, and that is what I'm hoping to communicate is that all lives are sacred, and that we're constantly being asked that we don't get to pick and choose who does and does not have the image of God within them. That's not our job. And we just have to be present enough to stand alongside the people that the most vulnerable and who Christ says he is to be found in. Again, least of these. And I'm going a little on and on about that, but
No, I think you could go on and on about that all
yeah.
evening. That was beautiful and that was powerfully said and amen. Amen to all of it. Um, Goodness, that was just excellent. And I think you answered like three of my questions in that one.
Oh,
So
okay.
fabulous all around. Um, as you were talking about how people will resist certain images of God, they'll resist certain representations of God. Um, your art has clearly found an audience that's eager for images that portray the spiritual amidst the real world and which engage topics of justice. But have you experienced any pushback on your icons that portray injustice? And if so, how do you handle that?
Yeah, again, I think I hope I hold out hope that we people will open themselves up to new images of God. I mean, there's been a one of the most interesting ones was in 2020 after the tragic death of George Floyd. We at the time, my partner and I were living in St. Louis, Missouri, which had had so much history with the Ferguson riots and the killing of Michael Brown and other things going on, and with George Floyd's death and our faith communities and different communities that we involved in were just like so as across country, people were just so just rattled and saddened by that death and we said, what are we going to do? What's an image that we could create to kind of understand what is happening? And we created this Pietà image of a black Madonna and a black Mary and dead Christ figure that resembled George Floyd, sure, but it was Mary and Christ. And a lot of people asked us after the fact, is that George Floyd or is it Jesus? And our answer to that was yes. That again, Christ is to be found in the least of these, but also as Mary Saint, Teresa of Calcutta said, Christ in distressing disguise, um, in the sense that so for us with that image though, I think it really for people though was there a lot of pushback to that Christ could be in portrayed as a black man. And we got a lot of pushback. That image was at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and it was a print of it, and it was stolen 3 times. from my chapel. Um, and but the main thing I think that is for me that with a lot of the pushback is this it is people trying to protect God. The thing is that God doesn't need protecting. And you can be pretty sure when you're trying to protect God, you're trying to protect some version of God, which is basically the exact opposite of an icon, which is an idol. But I think with the university there during this time, there was a conversation that could have happened that didn't happen, which is very sad. But mainly, with these kind of images, we're resisting something that there's a conversation that could happen. And I think so often in the church, and when it comes to art and social justice, and with pieces that we're uncomfortable with, whether it's not even visual art, but music, poetry, what have you, it's things that we're uncomfortable with. There's just a lot of times where we're just not willing to have the conversations. Far too often, the church is like Peter around the fire during Passion Week, that instead of having the hard conversations, we pretend like we don't know Christ, and suffering with Christ and standing with Christ in that moment, we we pretend like we don't know Christ and we don't answer the questions and we run away and act like we didn't know him, he didn't exist. And so, whose problem was that? And so I think um but again, I think it's the hope that these conversations can happen. I think there's a lot, and I'm not the only artist doing this, but I think there's a lot of artists and important people within the church who are willing to have these hard conversations about representation, about these ICE raids that are currently happening, about the way that poor people are being treated in different parts of our country and across the world. And they need to happen. But I think in a sense, though, I think what artwork can do is say things that words can't say. And again, I'm not the only person doing this, but I think that what's really interesting about it is that we in our time we're so inundated with images, we're so inundated with things in our phone, we're doing so much looking at art and news and everything in isolation on these little windows. It's not like a window like an icon where it's window heavy. It's like this one little window just for us. And but when we're able to just kind of not speak into something so quickly, but just learn how to observe. But when we do that in the sense of community, I think it can actually change us. Like it can actually name things maybe within us that we're not actually seeing. And so I think a big question though for us entering into communities and talking about iconography, but also church art, and it seems like a really simple question, but it's like, what is our church art for? Like, what is our church art for in our communities? Is it glorified wallpaper, or could it actually be something that teaches us how to see in new ways? Not only see one another, but see God and our neighbors and those in our midst in new ways. And so my hope is in the work that we've been doing is how do I create images that are just something that the ways that I'm seeing God, but potentially and seeing God in Christ in my time, in the refugee and the migrant and other of the most vulnerable among us. But then how can that potentially be a way for people to then open themselves again, have a conversion of sight, and to create these conversations with the church that maybe are not happening, but definitely need to happen. So
That's excellent. Thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Um, I think as we talk about working with community, and I love that element of art teaching us to see. How do you approach representing communities or experiences that are not your own? Whether that is a migrant or a refugee, the Mama piece with George Floyd. Um, how do you work with various communities, whether that's a commission or that's something that you just feel called to portray?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it's listening. I mean, I think the role of what it means to be a human, but also what it means to be an artist is just to be more present and to pay attention rightly. And I mean, as an artist, I'm really trying to keep training myself how to see rightly and to take the right things for granted. Um, and in that sense, though, I mean, the commission works. My favorite part about iconography is that it's a very communal art. Like I get to enter into conversations with communities. I like to call them holy ponderings, in a sense that I wouldn't really be able to do if I would be doing just solely portraiture or other, other kinds of different work. Um, and so Abby and I, we get to, when we specifically do commission work, we get to go into communities and have these types of conversations, like I had just mentioned. I mean, just one example, like experienced, a woman who was a part of a black woman who was a part of grew up in a parish. It was mainly grew up her whole life and up until her 30s. A lot of the artwork was of white saints and angels, and up until she was around 30 years old, she thought that black individuals couldn't go to heaven because the only representation that she saw on in her church was of white saints and angels. So it just shows you like something's off. And in that same context, we had gone to um, a church that where we had a commission of the Transfiguration, which is a very traditional icon, Christ, the Transfigured Christ, and um, you know, we had this moment where there was an arts committee and the priest was there, and we were asking, what they were looking for. And one person in the congregation or in the committee had said, I really want Christ's robes to be dazzling white. And an older black woman who was a part of the committee had said, well, I'm really uncomfortable with that, the whiteness of Christ. And she says, is there another way that we could think about that? And we had a conversation for like a half an hour about how to do, how do we think about that? And well, what if it was not the whiteness, more about the brightness of that moment? And it ended up being that we decided, well, what if we put silver leaf over Christ's robes, which was not a traditional way to do the icon. But what ended up being, ending up becoming a gift because when the icon was finished, when the light hit it, it ended up reflecting across the the sanctuary and just her speaking up and us having that awkwardness in that conversation and with the group. I mean, it wasn't that awkward for me. I think everyone else felt awkward, but I'm just sensed that that conversation had to happen in order for us to move. And I think the icon ended up becoming better because of it. And I think that um, ultimately it is about listening. It is about, there are times um where you have to, for far too long, the church has neglected, even rejected those on the margins of society. But then when it complains about church membership and money or whatever, like whose problem is that? Like the gifts are there. The gifts of the church are here. We just have to be aware enough to listen and to receive in order to change and to move forward. And then so I think when I enter into these places that are not my current experience or how I grew up, that's the baseline is listening. I mean, it's very simple, but yeah.
I think that's excellent advice. Yeah, and I love how you keep coming back to those elements of it's in conversation and it's in community. And I think that that's very much the hope with conversations like this, where we're talking about the things and we're talking about the art. So I'm keeping an eye on time. I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll move into the slideshow and looking at some of your art and talking
Yeah.
about that. But I think as our final question, I'll say, what advice would you give to emerging artists who are seeking to engage with topics of justice?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think ultimately I when it comes to for me, I think um, everything I'm doing, like iconography, art, none of it means, again, I'm going back to relationships. None of it means anything without the relationships that make life worth living. None of it.
Mm.
And like most of these icons have actually come out of our relationships with people. And, with Sacred Familia, when the first image I put online of this Latinx um, family going through the desert, as the Holy Family in modern context, was really based on meeting a young man from Guatemala, for all intents and purposes, an undocumented man, around a bonfire and hearing his hopes and his dreams and his fears and why he came to the United States. And his story broke Evie and I, and you know, in that time of 2016, with all this rhetoric of anti-immigrant, anti-stranger, like his life was sacred. We thought of him. And I think for the artist, it's you can quickly become a hermit if you're not careful. And I think uh, you're trying to communicate something, but you also have to be in the world and be um, and my current I'm about to turn 40 next month, and as a 40-year-old, like you you can be a hermit. It's easy to get into your routines, but I want to continually stay inspired. I think for the young artists, in their time is go be with the people that you're concerned about. Find ways to volunteer, find ways um, to hear stories. I mean, I think it's through storytelling and through that communicating that and being able to uh, be a witness to that and making a habit of doing that is really, and then the art that comes from it and being able to make the quote and the invisible stories visible, um, is really going to make an impact in our time as we continue to be in an era where um, people are vilified who are just trying but their lives are holy, and they're really trying to live lives of or really trying to live a better life and trying to um, um, move forward. And I think that the more that we can raise up those voices and be conduits to other artists and other people who to do that as well, I think it is the best. But it's really about an intersection of yourself, God, and the pains of the world, and where that comes to a point that maybe, the work can really be. And I mean, and again, I'm still, as a 40-year-old, still as of next month, still processing through all of that, and as going through this work and continuing to do it as well. But just stay present, pay attention, and show up to the places where you feel loved. And
I think that's wonderful. And thank you so much for sharing your perspective, Kelly. I deeply appreciate having the opportunity to learn from you on this topic. Um, so now, Eric, if you're ready, we're going to share that screen. Perfect. So we're going to view a couple of Kelly's icons. And Kelly, going back to one of our earlier questions, if you could walk us through how you came up with the idea for this image, what it meant for you to picture holy figures this way. I put the name of each image on the side. And in case anyone is listening and not watching, I'll just give brief a brief description of it. So first up, we have Mother of God, Protectress of the Oppressed. I had mentioned this image earlier, and this one was one that was so powerful to me. It portrays Mary and Jesus behind a fence. I was looking at it with my daughters when I was making this PowerPoint, and my older daughter, who's 7, kept coming back to the detail of Christ's hand gripping the fence, and
mm,
I hadn't even noticed that. And so it was so powerful to me that she immediately was like, look at how his hand is holding on to it. So I
mm.
would love for you to tell us about the process of this picture.
Well, yeah, this came about during during the first Trump administration, just this. uh, family separation and uh, just everything that was going on. I think that that's been a, a constant uh, theme for us is that this idea that um, again, I've already said it, but the sacredness of all life, and specifically like how do we stand amongst the most vulnerable among us in our time? That again, Christ says he's to be found, and so. Um, for us, I mean, what was really interesting about this icon, and it was very rare, is I painted it in one day. Um, and I think uh, it's that is a rare thing for me, but in the sense that I think and many times there's situations and things going on that, um, you know, I'm sitting with for a long time in terms of how, I mean, especially with everything going on with ICE in Minneapolis and across the country, still processing that. But, in this time, it was just like, like everyone that is in in famous, it's just so awful. But specifically within the iconography and the Orthodox tradition, Mary was always considered the protectress of the oppressed. That's kind of specifically the Russian Orthodox iconography is the protectress of the oppressed. So Mary is to be found with the oppressed. And so at that time, Mary being this mother with her child in this detention center, but her mantle, instead of being, these glamorous purple robes, whatever it's Mylar, and the Christ child, um, being there with her in the midst of this, that he is also suffering and there. And, we, Abby and I have spent a lot of time at the border through over the last 10 years and through different things. And these children are experiencing so much pain and PTSD and terrible things. And so for us, this image was just a way to, again, show that not only the Holy Mother and Mary is protecting these people and they're within it, but then how do we also then respond to make sure this doesn't keep happening? So, and that's been a theme too of a lot of these icons. What do we do so this doesn't keep happening?
Absolutely. Well, and this one really hits home with what do we do to make sure it doesn't keep happening.
Right.
Um, Okay, speaking of protectiveness, the next one, which is Christ in the Rubble, portrays the Holy Family amidst the rubble of a city being destroyed. The protective attitude of Mary and Joseph and the star shining above them, to me, just made this piece equally heartbreaking and beautiful. Like it is a beautiful image, but but the pain is so clearly there. So where were you thinking of when you created this image? Unfortunately, it could be many places in our
Yes.
present day world. So I was just curious, were you thinking of a specific place when you created this?
Mhm.
Or tell us more.
Yeah, well, I think so very specifically, it ended up being like this was a commission. To be honest, it was through the Munther Isaac or Isaac Munther from Palestine. He was as a Lutheran priest, and he had talked about in 2023, 2022, when everything started, that this Christmas, Christ will be under the rubble because of everything going on in Gaza. And it was through a collaboration of him and Shane Claiborne and Red Letter Christians and a few organizations that we collaborated in this piece to raise money for aid to Gaza. So this piece was really for that. And but also it was not only, I mean, very specifically using the traditional icon forms, the buildings and the different the Holy Family is very using traditional iconography, but also these elements of war and the fire and the rubble and uh I mean seeing it here or there, but I think it's interesting that like of anything of this piece, the rubble took me the longest time to do, which I think is like a symbol of just like of just how terrible war is. Like the rubble is the thing that is the most tedious. It's the most awful of the
Mhm.
image in the sense. Um, but I mean, I think it's especially with Gaza, it's been a definitely in our time been a dividing issue for a lot of people. But for me, I mean, I visited Palestine in 2008 as a young man, and I met Israeli soldiers, and I lived in Hebron with little farming villages and families for a time, and these people were sacred, all of them. And I think it's about ending a silence, that there's an effort to end silence and begin to speak truth to that these, again, these people are sacred, and people in Gaza, but also in Ukraine and Sudan, and people experiencing war. So the impetus was from the war and people being the genocide in Gaza, but also really was at its sense was all all those sacred lives who are being lost in senseless war across the world. And so it was really trying to, it had a specific context in the moment, but honestly, as since has really spoken to other again, senseless war and violence going on across the world.
Yeah, I think it depicts that well. It depicts it very well. So next up is one of my absolute favorites of yours, which is the Trinity. It's showing the Trinity as three individuals seated around a table. I love the eye contact that's happening within it, the racial representation, and the fact that it is all women.
Yeah.
So please tell us about this one and about why you chose like these particular representations.
Yeah. So this is one of my earlier pieces. It was very one of my first commissions actually, and it's from a friend, it's Father Mark Bozzuti Jones, and Episcopal priest, and it was really trying to enter into again this idea of, and for those who know iconography, this is really a complete called back to one of the most famous icons, just Andrei Rublev's icon of the Trinity, um, from around the 1500s. And but instead of three men, it was the commissioner, Michael G. Jones, was like, well, what if we kind of play with this? And a lot of the symbols are the same. You have the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You have the temple, which represents the Father, the tree, which represents Christ, the mountain, which is like the wilderness, the Holy Spirit. But instead of um, them being separate, they're extend holding hands. That the you have an outstretched hands of the Holy Spirit on the green towards the viewer, but then the Christ figure holding the pointing towards the viewer. And instead of wine and bread, you have grapes and wheat, which represents the work that we still have to do. Um, this is all from the commissioner, in the sense, and then the colors of the rainbow flag, which could be the LGBTQI movement, but also um, just this idea of again a representation, and that all are welcome in God's kingdom. And so this was really a beautiful piece to kind of represent that. I mean, it's a very famous icon, the original, but again, using those same forms and metaphors and what's come before, but carrying it forward in a way where it's the same, but maybe shifted and made new. Um, and again, if you're going to change things in iconography, you should have a pretty good theological reason why you're going to do it. And we can talk about that later in the Q&A as well. But I think this was a reason that there was a good theological reason why we wanted to kind of play with that original icon, and having three women and three women of color and everything involved in the elements was really important to us in this. So.
Yeah, I love being able to receive that explanation because there's so much depth to it, and everything that you had spoken about before when it really comes to communities and representing the underrepresented, I think really shines through in this one.
Mm.
Okay, I had to include this next one, which is glitch transfiguration.
Yeah.
Um, Eric and I were emailing about which ones, to ask you to include, and we were like, We've got to know. We've got to know about this
Yeah.
one. How did you come up with this? The Transfiguration is such a classic icon, and then you have this version of it,
Hmm.
um, which is just, it's fascinating. So tell
Yeah.
us more.
Well, this is really fun. So this is actually it really is a glitch of an actual icon I painted. It's maybe maybe the eighth or tenth icon I did for it was a commission for my friend of mine, Father Tom, and um, of the Transfiguration. And I had it on the iPad, all these images of an iPad, the icon images I had, and I was with my nephew Elliot, and he was messing around with the different images, and I don't know what he did, but he like did something with the program, and it did that, and I was like, "Whoa!" I was like, "What did you just do?" And I was amazed. It was like a happy accident. And he was laughing hysterically. He was like 10 at the time. We were laughing. And then I just had this like realization. So I like went back to the scriptures of the Transfiguration and it just made sense. And so I immediately saved it. And really, I mean, it's a really moving thing because you have the Transfiguration, you have this moment where the transfiguration happens. You have Moses and Elijah there and the disciples, and Peter's like, he wants to like cement the moment. He's like, let's build some booze. Like, let's make this moment last. And the thing is though, is that like we're always trying to create we're always trying to make our own transfigurations. We mean well through like art, music, and all these things. We can mean very well. But the thing is that it's the thing that the light that we think we're holding, it's never been there. It's always been scattering and reflecting all about. And like Jesus in that moment, he's calling us to go to Jerusalem. Like he's calling us to go into the unknown, but we're just failing to see. And so I think that this like happy accident ended up representing this like beautiful moment that is really like we can forget is the core of that point in the gospel where Jesus is like he's calling us to go out into the unknown. Peter wants us to stay in place and keep this like holy thing in one like encapsulated thing, but what he thinks he's holding has already been, it's already the love, the light, all of it has already just been going out and he just failed to see. And so that represents that is that icon represents so much to me, and I have my nephew to thank for that accident.
I love that. A very true collaboration
Yeah.
on that one. So the last one that I wanted to talk about before we open it up for questions is Our Lady Protectress of the Most Vulnerable. Last but certainly not least, Mary appears to be wearing a hijab, cradling the Christ Jesus with the concern so clear in both their eyes, while surrounded by rubble and smoke. The pain in this piece was what was just visceral to me the first time I saw it. And so, how did you create something that was so incredibly emotional and evocative? Um, and how did you feel your art was addressing injustice in this work?
Well, I think it's very it's akin to the Christ in the Rubble. There's the context there. There um I think growing up, I mean growing I don't I want to go through too much, but I mean growing up, I think what I had known before I went to Palestine in 2008, there was this idea that um in growing up in school, there was this like painting all Palestinian people as terrorists and all particular people groups as not good, as evil, as this and that and the other. And then to have this experience in my 20s to go to this tiny farming village and to have a woman who looked exactly like the woman and a son who exactly looked like that person, the young son who I met, and I stayed in her home. She fed me 3 meals that were incredible. She took care of me. I slept on her roof with several others. She's the most loving person I've ever met in my life. And just to for someone else to say across, in America to say that this woman was potentially evil or terrible person just because of where she lived, was what I grew up with. It was life-changing. It showed me that I'm going back to relationships. Meeting her and her family and living with them for a time in this little village and um in Hebron. It just shows us that though at the same time in that village, um, they were experiencing so much pain and violence and things, but people are taking care of each other, um, and taking care of specifically the children were really honestly the ones experiencing the most pain. There was a 4 mile road to go to their school. Some extremist religious Zionists were blocking that road, and so these children had to walk it instead of walking 4 miles, they had to walk 11 miles to and back, so 22 miles every day, to and back from school. And so, and while we were there, and it just broke us. And again, there's this idea, the protectress of the most vulnerable, and Mary and that idea. Um, but then, moving forward to now with Gaza but also across the globe, that I think as Christians that we al always have to, um, our allegiance is never to a government or a policy or all of these things. It has to be to Christ and the church and to the most vulnerable. And um and ultimately, like, I think that this piece is like a testament to that, and it's a hope to that in the way that I wanted to depict it, that um despite everything, like, and all of the suffering and everything going on, like, these people are sacred, they're loved, they're images of God, are icons of God. And yes, there's parts of the image that could be disturbing and what have you, but it's a hope. It's again holding out hope for people can. I'm holding out hope that people can open themselves to new images of God and to images of God that could be hard to deal with, but there are conversations hopefully that can happen within our parishes and within ourselves and within each other, and as we continue to move forward in times of unrest or in our communities, and how we communicate and just look and see and having these conversions of sight and all these things. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Kelly, thank you. Thank you again. What a treat, not only to view your work alongside you, but also to have a chance to hear the stories behind it. Now I'm going to open up the floor for questions that you all have for Kelly. Feel free to raise your hand on the screen or with the emoji, or you can send in a question through the chat. And I will read them out or call on y'all, and we will get to as many folks as we can in these remaining couple of minutes. And Eric, if you could help me field.
Yeah, so it looks like we have Kelly. There's been some questions about the lettering at the top of your icons. Can you just speak briefly to that?
Yeah, so you'll see, so specifically the Our Lady, this one that was on the screen, Our Lady Protectors of the Most Vulnerable. So with iconography, and even doing like the more typically modern interpretations of it. I've still tried to kind of hold on to a lot of the traditions and to the of iconography. And so when you look at that piece, like MPOY, so a lot of the iconographers, they when iconography first started, they would write the like uh so Christ's name, like Jesus Christ or Mary, Mother of God. And so in the Greek specifically, the names are very long. And so the iconographers, as a way to not have to paint all the letters, they came up with a short script so that it was very, they would just use the first and last letter of each word. And so MPOY. So it was a way for them to kind of have to not have to paint as much. But at the same time, it's it really indicating that, hey, this is Mary, or you'll see ICXC, which is Christ. So if you see that on an icon, it's really saying, hey, this is Mary, or hey, this is Jesus. But it was really a way in traditional iconography for iconographers to say, to really point to like be very clear, this is Jesus or this is Mary. And so I've tried to keep that tradition in a lot of the icons that I've done.
Yeah, thank you. There's like we have some questions too about kind of your own influences. Particularly, we have someone who's wondering if there's any historic or modern Greek or Russian iconographer who has influenced your portraiture, and just kind of in general where you learned iconography, this traditional art form from.
Yeah, so I have through time, I mean, I really when I started, I was really just using books. I was really just doing what all artists do, but specifically iconography specifically is just tracing. And so I was usually tracing from books and putting them on boards and then painting. But now as time goes on, I've gotten to meet a lot of other iconographers across the country that I highly respect. And now uh, I'm blown away to say now to call friends. There's Father William Hart McNichols, which is a Jesuit priest, is a friend now. He lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Brother Robert Lentz, Mark Dukes, who's done a lot of amazing work. But I mean, I've been very influenced by a lot of other artists who are just really do good at paying attention. David Hockney, British artist, uh, Jacob Lawrence, who he had this migration series. It was of Black life in the 1930s and 40s. To Alice Neal, who's a portrait artist. She used to say that people are their own gifts, which I think is a very beautiful and different way to say that people are sacred. She's a portrait artist in New York City. But yeah, I'm looking to a lot of different artists always uh, that are continually inspiring me and people who paid attention well, and I look to hopefully do that myself.
Thank you. Do we think we have time for one more? I know we're kind of going a little late, but what do we think? Kelly,
Yeah.
Alli. Yeah, let's do one more here. There's a question. Eileen Emmer says, when my students create their own icons on the theme of poverty and privilege, they seek to tell a story and to provoke their viewer to prayer, to action, to respond. What do you hope to provoke in your viewers?
Yeah, I think with iconography, I mean, with any kind of art, it's a communication. And it is a challenge. It can be something that reveals, it can be dangerous in a sense, but also can be reparatory. It can be a means for the oppressed and ignored to speak, for those people who are maybe making art in that sense. But ultimately, I think that um, in that sense, I mean, art is communication. We go to Eucharist and communion. I think um, communion is a mutual or communicate. It's a mutual participation in. And if anything, I could really end this on, if we're talking the last question, but to speak this specifically, is that when we have in our time, we're so much inundated with images. We have so much going on with social media, advertising. You drive down the highway, there's so many billboards, whatever. like we're so quick to like speak into things, um, and to quickly think, but we really are able to observe. And but I think with the context of our faith communities and specifically art, um, and its way that could be used in our churches, but also through activism, whatever is it's a way for us to, and seeing art in community can really be a way for us to have a mutual participation in looking and seeing. And we all have different perspectives in our lives and our experiences because of our race, our sexual orientation, where we lived, where we grew up, our country of origin, whatever. And when we look at something together, we're all going to see something different, whether becomes an image of Jesus and throughout art history, or these images that I've created or others have created. And I think that the more that we do that in community, the more it can change us, the more it can help us to see things we might not have been able to see in ourselves, or ways we may not have been able to see in God and our neighbor and those around us. And so I think ultimately that's my hope, and I hope that it can be continually be something that keeps on happening in sacred art in our time. So
Well, Kelly, thank you again so much.
yeah,
I think you gave us so much to ponder, and I love and I appreciate your call to both to community and to seeing the sacredness in all people. I think those are things um, that we all need to hear. So thank you
thank
again
you.
for that. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
thank you to everybody, and thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you both, Ali. Thank you for some brilliant facilitation, and Kelly for your comments. And I want to thank everyone who attended. We have a lot more Jesuit Media Lab events to come, so please visit our events page, sign up for our webinars, our courses, and all sorts of good fun stuff, and continue reflecting on that intersection of creativity and spirituality together. Thank you all, and have a great evening.